people who are fast, people who sing well, people who are book smart, people who are good at talking, and people who can use psychic powers. They're all unique, and you can't put one over the other.
Self-improvement, humility, and becoming more than you are. These are three ideas that stood out to me in the anime Mob Psycho 100. Mob Psycho the manga was created by One, which is a pseudonym of the unknown manga artist that created the very popular One Punch Man. And I'm sure, as you know, the main characters in both Mob Psycho 100 and One Punch Man are probably the two most overpowered MCs in anime. They literally win like 99% of their fights. Usually in anime, we expect the main character's story to be one of attaining power to achieve a lofty goal, like either becoming Hokage, or the #1 hero, or finding the One Piece and becoming the Pirate King. But it's nothing like that in Mob Psycho. There's no journey to attain more power, there's no lofty goals to achieve. In fact, the main character's life is pretty ordinary. So how can things like self-improvement, humility, and becoming a better version of yourself stand out in something like this? In our lives, we might have met people that were born with an outstanding characteristic or talent. It could be beauty, or being naturally good at music, or even family wealth. Or we might be those people. Quite often what tends to happen is those people go down a path of only being identified by those attributes or characteristics, or they feel like those things might make them special or maybe more deserving of more things than the regular person, either popularity or friends. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. And this is something Kageyama Shigeo, or Mob as Reagan, his sensei, calls him, realized. So Mob is a middle school kid that was born with extraordinary psychic abilities, and you might even say they were godlike. And from a young age, he was able to use these powers to make things levitate and to move objects around. And he used this ability to impress those around him, especially this one girl that he had a huge crush on. But after a while, she got bored of it after seeing it so many times, and she became fascinated in a different characteristic in someone else that was on the track team. And this was a humbling moment that really changed Mob's outlook on himself as an individual. He realized that there was nothing more to him other than his powers, and this was the only thing that made him interesting. Without it, he was quite plain. He went unnoticed by most people, he couldn't really make friends and wasn't too confident in himself. And at that moment, he resolved not to use his powers as a defining characteristic of himself. And you see him say this during his fight against Hanazawa, who is another Esper or psychic user.
これは同族嫌悪だ。花沢君は僕に少し似てる。超能力を持ってるところじゃなくて、自分に全然自信がないところ。自分から超能力を取ったら何も残らない。空っぽなんだ。それに気づくのが怖いんだ。友達も少ない。目立たなくて何の記録も残せない脇役の凡人。それが僕。
Mob knows that he lacks certain traits that would make him a more well-rounded, likable, or popular person. And the show highlights the importance of refraining from solely identifying yourself with or getting complacent with a skill or characteristic that you might consider to be advantageous or special. As much as those things may be amazing, deriving your identity from them would have you go down a shallow path that's just filled with superficial things that can be lost very easily, like fake friends or fame that you obtained with it, leaving you with everything else about yourself, which would be nothing. Mob refuses to identify with his powers to almost a pathological level, and there's some psychological elements to explore there, but I'll save that for another video. In this clip, we see Mob easily defeat a spirit that was considered to be extremely powerful and to have haunted this place for years and killed a huge number of people. And when he does, one character had to ask who he was because of how easily he was able to defeat this spirit, and he said nobody, which I thought was ironic because this unknown person was able to easily defeat this spirit that tales and stories had been told about for years. The anime shows us how easy it is to fall into the trap of overestimating the significance of a small part of ourselves, either as a result of insecurity or trauma. And we see this in the character Hanazawa that we mentioned before, who derives all of his confidence and value from thinking that he's the most powerful Esper in the world, until he was humbled by Mob, who defeated him in such a decisive manner during his berserk state. And Hanazawa's attitude after this was so much more different. He became a lot more humble, and even when he got into fights after, he seemed a lot more level-headed and more powerful as a result. And we see something similar with the Scar members who, because of how they were treated by society when they were younger, they became trapped in their childhood form. The trauma stunted their growth, and their powers became the only thing that they relied on to have some sort of significance or feel special. And with it, they chose to turn against society, like angry kids throwing a tantrum, or like little kids that had been given a knife, like they said in the show. And after they were defeated, again, the most outstanding characteristic that they possessed was humility. Mob was different from all these villains. From the glimpses of what we've seen, he didn't necessarily have an easy childhood. He got bullied as well, but he felt immense regret for hurting people with his powers whenever they went out of control, which was why he even went to meet Reagan in the first place to try controlling them, and that's why he also refrained from ever using it against other humans. But it doesn't look as easy as just doing whatever it is that you want, because you can. You see Mob still struggle in day-to-day life. He's still awkward, he can't talk to his crush, and he still lacks the stamina to halfway keep up with the body improvement club. But he's constantly trying and battling these parts of himself that still needs polishing. Even those around him were confused as to why he didn't just use psychic powers to get whatever it is that he wants. Why isn't he trying to take over the world or become famous or something? And he says that there's some things that he can't get with psychic powers, like muscles or being able to talk to a girl that he likes. And he even looks up to his younger brother Ritsu, who he says is intelligent, hardworking, charismatic, and able to make friends. These are all things that someone isn't necessarily born with, and it takes time to attain. The path to becoming a better version of yourself is boring, but it's a culmination of all the boring days put together that gives you the picture of the extraordinary person that you become. Another thing that I found interesting about what One did in this anime, as I mentioned in the intro, was how Mob is the most powerful psychic user in this universe, and he has no great goal that he's trying to achieve, at least going by the standards of other anime. And I think what One might have been trying to highlight in Mob Psycho 100 is that the constant pursuit to understanding yourself and striving to become a better version of yourself is a great goal in and of itself. And he removed the typical trope of journeying to obtain power, and he put ideals behind a character that already had the most amount of power that he could ever get, almost signifying that true power does not necessarily act to exert itself on others, but is humble about it and acts to constantly improve itself. One part of the anime that highlighted this for me was when a Scar member was going to face Mob, and before he left, the leader referred to them as being special beings, solely because of their psychic powers. And Hanazawa replied to him saying that if he thought like that, then they definitely couldn't beat Mob. And considering that Hanazawa knows how powerful Mob is, he should have known none of the Scar members could defeat him based off raw strength alone, regardless of their ideals. But he pointed this out almost as if to say that this was a clash of ideals rather than powers. And if we look back on the villains that Mob fought before, you find this theme. They have certain ideals that sort of inflates the fact that they have psychic abilities. The anime kind of suggests that these ideals held by these people are weaker than that held by Mob, and that's why they lost. And after the Scar members were defeated, one of them said that Mob and his companions were strong, and another replied that, or as I interpreted it, it meant that they had weak ideals that were just motivated by their childhood vengeance. The anime discourages viewing unique characteristics about yourself or those things that stand out as making you better than anyone else. And if you go back and watch this video again, you can just replace the parts where I mentioned psychic powers with any of the more relatable traits that I mentioned, and then you might be able to see how this compares with our world. As Reagan says in the last episode of season 1, you're not special, we're all just commoners.